Something happened in the Middle East that nobody saw coming. Not the diplomats, not the analysts, not even Israel's own government. The United States brokered a ceasefire in Lebanon, and Israel, one of America's closest allies, found out about it almost the same time the rest of the world did. Let that sink in for a second. A deal that directly affected Israeli soldiers, Israeli borders, and Israeli national security. And Israel was the last one at the table to know the full details. This is not a small story. This is not just another news headline that you scroll past. This is a turning point in the relationship between two countries that have stood side by side for decades. And if you don't understand what happened here, you don't understand what is about to unfold across the entire Middle East. Stay with me, because we are going to break this down piece by piece, and by the end of this video, you will see the full picture. And it will change how you look at everything happening in that region. You are watching Federal Alert, the channel that goes deeper than the headlines, and we are just getting started. Before we jump into the full story, if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and smash that like button. Federal Alert covers the stories that matter, the ones that shape our world, and we do it in a way that actually makes sense. Now let's get into it. To understand why this ceasefire caught Israel off guard, we need to go back and understand the situation on the ground in Lebanon, because this conflict did not start overnight. It has roots that go deep, decades of tension, proxy wars, political manipulation, and regional power struggles all converging in one small country that has been caught in the middle of forces far bigger than itself. Lebanon shares a border with Israel to the south. For many years, that border has been one of the most tense stretches of land on the planet. Hezbollah, the Iran-backed militant group, has controlled southern Lebanon for a long time. They have weapons, they have fighters, they have political power inside the Lebanese government, and they have a stated mission of confronting Israel at every opportunity. This is not just rhetoric. They have rockets, they have drones, they have missiles that can reach deep into Israeli territory, and Israel knows this. Israel has known this for years. When the conflict in Gaza escalated dramatically, Hezbollah opened what they called a support front in the north. They began firing rockets, anti-tank missiles, and drones into northern Israel almost daily. Not at the scale of Gaza, but enough to force over 60,000 Israeli civilians to evacuate their homes in northern communities, towns that had been lived in for generations, suddenly empty. Families sleeping in hotels in Tel Aviv, in the center of the country, because going home meant risking their lives. This went on for months. Month after month of cross-border fire, of Israeli airstrikes into southern Lebanon, of Hezbollah launching more attacks, of Israeli communities sitting empty and abandoned while their residents waited and hoped. And then Israel made a decision. After months of trying to get Hezbollah to stop through diplomatic pressure and targeted strikes, the Israeli military launched a ground operation into southern Lebanon. This was a major escalation. Israeli tanks and infantry crossed the border. Israeli special forces were operating inside Lebanese territory. The stated goal was to push Hezbollah back far enough that those 60,000 displaced Israelis could return home safely. Israel called it a limited, focused operation. But the world watched nervously, because limited operations in that part of the world have a history of becoming something much bigger. At the same time, back in Washington, the outgoing Biden administration was working frantically to secure a ceasefire before the end of its term. This was partly about legacy. Biden wanted to be able to say he stopped a war from spiraling out of control. But it was also about genuine concern that the fighting could escalate into a full regional war involving Iran directly, which would be catastrophic. So American diplomats were working the phones, flying to the region, meeting with Lebanese officials, with Saudi officials, with French officials. France has historically had a deep relationship with Lebanon, and yes, with Israeli officials, too. Here is where the story gets complicated. And this is the part that most of the mainstream media coverage glossed over, but Federal Alert is going to dig into it, because this is where the real story lives. The ceasefire deal that was eventually announced had several key components. It called for a 60-day cessation of hostilities. It required Hezbollah to pull back its forces north of the Litani River, a waterway that sits about 18 miles north of the Israeli border. It called for the Lebanese army to deploy in the south, filling the space left by Hezbollah. And it required Israel to withdraw its forces from Lebanese territory. On paper, this sounds like a reasonable framework. Both sides stop fighting, both sides pull back, an international mechanism monitors compliance, and everyone gets a chance to breathe. But here is what happened behind the scenes, and here is why Israel was blindsided. The final terms of the deal, the specific language, the specific commitments, the specific timelines, were finalized in a way that left Israeli officials scrambling to understand what exactly they had agreed to. According to multiple reports, from Israeli media, senior members of the Israeli War Cabinet were not fully briefed on the final text before it was announced publicly. The American side moved quickly. The announcement was made, and Israeli officials were left reading the details in real time, just like the rest of us. Now, the Israeli government officially endorsed the ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went on television and said it was the right decision. He cited several reasons: the need to focus military resources on Gaza, the need to give the displaced northern communities a path home, and the reality that continuing the Lebanon operation indefinitely was not sustainable. All of those reasons are legitimate. But what was striking to Israeli journalists, to members of the Israeli Knesset, and to defense establishment insiders was the way the announcement happened. The speed, the lack of full coordination, the sense that Israel was presented with a fait accompli, a done deal, rather than a negotiated outcome where they had full agency every step of the way. One senior Israeli official speaking anonymously to Israeli media described it as being told the wedding is happening, now show up and put on a suit. That is a striking way to describe your relationship with your closest ally. And it tells you something important about the dynamics at play. Why would the Biden administration move so quickly without fully coordinating with Israel? There are several theories, and they are not mutually exclusive. First, time pressure. Biden was leaving office in weeks. If a deal was going to happen on his watch, it had to happen fast. Second, there may have been a calculation that if Israel was given too much time to debate and deliberate, internal political pressures, particularly from far-right members of Netanyahu's coalition who opposed any ceasefire, would derail the whole thing. Third, there is the broader question of American strategic interests in the region. Washington was not only thinking about Israel. It was thinking about Lebanon's fragile state, about preventing a wider war, about maintaining relationships with Arab allies who were watching the conflict with growing horror. The Americans had multiple balls in the air, and they made a judgment call about how to land all of them at once. But from Israel's perspective, this felt like a breach of trust. Not a dramatic, explosive breach. Israeli officials were not going to publicly denounce the United States, but a quiet, unsettling sense that on one of the most consequential decisions affecting their security, they were not fully in the driver's seat. Now let's talk about what the ceasefire actually means. On the ground, because the announcement of a ceasefire and the implementation of a ceasefire are two very different things. Anyone who has followed the Middle East for more than 5 minutes knows that ceasefires in this region are fragile things. They are starting points, not end points. They create space for diplomacy, but they do not resolve the underlying tensions that caused the conflict in the first place. In the days immediately following the ceasefire announcement, there were already violations, or what both sides called violations. Israel reported that Hezbollah fighters were not pulling back as required. Hezbollah accused Israel of continuing military activities inside Lebanese territory. The Lebanese army, which was supposed to deploy rapidly into the south, moved slowly, partly because the institution has been hollowed out by years of economic collapse and political dysfunction in Lebanon. The monitoring mechanism, a committee that included American, French, and other international representatives, was scrambling to get organized. This is the reality on the ground. A ceasefire agreement on paper, and a messy, complicated, deeply uncertain situation in the real world. Let's zoom out for a moment and talk about the bigger picture, because what happened with this Lebanon ceasefire is not just about Lebanon. It is a window into the shifting landscape of American foreign policy and American relationships in the Middle East. For decades, the United States and Israel operated in very close coordination. Every major American initiative in the region involved deep, continuous consultation with Israel. Every arms sale, every diplomatic initiative, every back channel. Negotiation. Israel was in the loop, often shaping the American position. This was the foundation of the relationship. Not just the military aid, not just the votes at the UN Security Council, but the day-to-day, hour-to-hour coordination between two governments that saw themselves as partners with aligned interests. What this Lebanon ceasefire episode suggests is that this coordination is not as seamless as it once was. And that matters enormously. Not just for Israel and the United States, but for the entire regional architecture of power in the Middle East. Think about what the other actors in the region are watching. Iran is watching. Hezbollah is watching. Hamas is watching. Saudi Arabia is watching. Turkey is watching. Every government, every militant group, every strategic actor in that neighborhood is analyzing what just happened and drawing conclusions. If America can finalize a deal that affects Israel without full Israeli buy-in, what does that say about the strength and solidity of the American-Israeli partnership? Some of those actors will see opportunity in that question. Now, let's talk about the Trump factor, because this is where the story takes another sharp turn. Donald Trump won the 2024 presidential election and was preparing to take office as all of this was unfolding. Trump has always presented himself as the ultimate deal-maker in the Middle East. He brokered the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, a genuinely significant diplomatic achievement. He moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. He gave Israel the green light on the Golan Heights. Under Trump's first term, the relationship between Washington and Jerusalem was arguably as close as it had ever been. So what does Trump think about a ceasefire that caught Israel by surprise? What does the incoming administration think about the way this deal was handled? These are not academic questions. They are practical questions with real consequences because, in a matter of weeks, Trump's team was taking over the levers of American foreign policy, and everything that the Biden administration had put in place was going to be reviewed, reassessed, and in some cases reversed. Early signals from Trump's team were interesting. There were indications of support for the ceasefire as an outcome. Even Trump's circle did not want a wider war in Lebanon. But there were also signals of frustration about the process, about the way the deal was structured, about what commitments had been made in America's name, and whether those commitments aligned with where the new administration wanted to go. One of the key questions was the 60-day window. The ceasefire called for a 60-day period of cessation of hostilities, during which a more permanent political arrangement was supposed to be negotiated. 60 days from the announcement of the ceasefire lands squarely in the early weeks of the Trump presidency. In other words, the hard part, the permanent arrangement, the real political resolution, was going to land in Trump's lap. Biden's team made the deal, and Trump's team was going to have to live with it and try to turn it into something durable. This is a significant dynamic. It means that whatever happens next in Lebanon, whether the ceasefire holds or collapses, whether Hezbollah actually withdraws or defies the terms, whether the Lebanese army deploys effectively or fails, it is going to happen on Trump's watch. And Trump's team is going to have to decide how to respond to whatever unfolds. Let's talk about Hezbollah specifically, because their role in all of this is central and cannot be overstated. Hezbollah came out of the conflict in Lebanon, significantly weakened compared to where they were before the fighting started. The Israeli military campaign had real effects. Several of Hezbollah's top commanders were killed, including their longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut in September 2024. This was a seismic moment. Nasrallah had led Hezbollah for over 30 years. He was not just a military commander, he was an ideological figurehead, a symbol, the face of the organization. Losing him was a blow that went far beyond the operational. It was a psychological and political wound. Beyond leadership losses, Hezbollah's weapons stockpiles were degraded. Their communications infrastructure was disrupted, infamously so, given the reports of exploding pagers and walkie-talkies that killed and injured hundreds of Hezbollah members in a stunning and unprecedented operation attributed to Israel. Their tunnel networks in southern Lebanon were targeted. Their logistics were disrupted. The organization, which had positioned itself as a powerful, capable resistance force, took real hits. But Hezbollah is not destroyed. It is wounded, but it is not gone. It still has thousands of fighters. It still has political representation in the Lebanese government. It still has a deep relationship with Iran, which has both the motivation and the resources to help rebuild what was lost. The question is not whether Hezbollah survives, it will. The question is what form it takes in the aftermath of this conflict, and whether the ceasefire creates conditions for a genuine, lasting change in the security situation in southern Lebanon, or whether it simply creates a pause before the next round. History gives us reason to be cautious. The last major ceasefire. In Lebanon, UN Security Council Resolution 1701, passed after the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah, was supposed to accomplish some of the same things. Hezbollah was supposed to withdraw from the south. The Lebanese army was supposed to deploy. International peacekeepers were supposed to monitor compliance. And for a while, it held. But over the years that followed, Hezbollah quietly rebuilt. They moved weapons back into the south. They rebuilt their network. And by 2024, they were more heavily armed than they had ever been in 2006. So when people say the new ceasefire is better than 1701, when people say the monitoring mechanisms are stronger, the skepticism from those who have watched this region closely is understandable. They have seen this movie before. Let's bring this back to the core question. What does it mean that Trump's Lebanon ceasefire, or more precisely, Biden's ceasefire that Trump inherited, took Israel by surprise? What does it tell us about where we are and where we are going? It tells us that the Middle East is entering a new phase of uncertainty. The old frameworks, the clear alliances, the predictable dynamics, the understood rules of the game are all in flux. America's role is being redefined. Israel's strategic position is being tested. Iran is watching and calculating. Arab states are hedging their bets. And the people living in the middle of all this, the Lebanese civilians who have suffered through decade after decade of war and dysfunction, the Israeli families in the north who just want to go home, the ordinary people on both sides of every border, they are the ones paying the highest price. At Federal Alert, we believe that understanding these dynamics is not just important, it is essential. Because these are not stories that stay in the Middle East. They travel. They affect oil prices. They affect security relationships that touch every part of the world. They affect what America does, and what America does affects everything. The Lebanon ceasefire story is not a foreign policy footnote. It is a preview of the challenges and the complications that are going to define the next 4 years under the Trump administration's foreign policy approach. There are big questions still unanswered. Will Hezbollah actually comply with the ceasefire terms, or will they exploit the pause to regroup and rearm? Will the Lebanese army be able to establish a meaningful presence in the south for the first time in modern history? Will Israel get what it actually needs, the ability to bring its 60,000 displaced citizens home, or will the security situation remain too uncertain? Will the Trump administration renegotiate or modify the ceasefire framework, and How will Hezbollah and Iran respond to a Trump-era approach? And most broadly, is the Lebanon ceasefire a genuine step toward regional stability, or is it a temporary pause before the next eruption? We do not have all the answers to those questions yet. But we are going to keep watching. We are going to keep reporting. And every time there is a significant development, every time Hezbollah moves, every time Israel makes a decision, every time Washington signals a new direction, Federal Alert is going to be here to break it down for you, to give you the context, the analysis, and the perspective that you need to actually understand what is happening. Because that is what we do here. We do not just read you headlines. We dig into the story behind the story. We look at the forces that are shaping events before most people even realize those forces exist. And we believe our audience, you, deserves that level of depth and honesty. If you made it this far in the video, you are exactly the kind of viewer that Federal Alert exists for. You want to understand the world. You want to go deeper. You are not satisfied with 30-second clips and shallow takes. So, here is what I want you to do right now. Leave a comment below and tell me, do you think this ceasefire will hold? Do you think Hezbollah will actually comply? Do you think the Trump administration is going to change the American approach to Lebanon and Israel in a significant way? I read every comment, and I want to know what you think. And if this video gave you value, if it helped you understand something that you did not understand before, please share it. Send it to someone who needs to see it. Share it on social media. Because the more people who understand these dynamics, the better conversations we can all have about what is actually happening in our world. This story is not over, not even close. The 60-day clock is ticking. The monitoring committees are meeting. Hezbollah is rebuilding. Israel is watching. Trump's team is reviewing everything. And somewhere in Tehran, the people who fund and arm and direct Hezbollah are making calculations about what comes next. The Lebanon ceasefire surprised Israel, but the next chapter of this story has the potential to surprise all of us. Stay with Federal Alert. We will be here when it does.